Hey YouTubers, I've got another little home improvement project I want to share with you guys. So when we moved into this house, we had a hard time finding a refrigerator that would fit inside the cabinet. The cabinets in this house are a little peculiar. The upper cabinets are a little low compared to average, so we have to be careful when we buy appliances to make sure that they'll fit. And the cabinet for the refrigerator is also a little bit low. Most standard size refrigerators are about 70 inches high, and they want an inch of airspace above the refrigerator. Now, we had to look high to low to find a refrigerator that would fit the last time, and that refrigerator now is 20 years old and starting to give us some problems. So we start looking for a replacement, and a 69-inch high refrigerator costs more than the next model up, and the 70-and-a-quarter-inch refrigerator is cheaper, has more features, and is more readily available. So normally what they would tell you to do is to cut away your trim piece right here to give you your 1 inch of clearance. Well, I would have to cut right here at this line, and I really don't want to do that for a few reasons. First of all, I think it would look a little odd. The likelihood of me cutting this without damaging the finish and then having to go back and stain the underside to match, it's a lot of work, and I'm just not real confident in how that would turn out. And so I got to thinking about it. I said, well, you know what? What's important is that the refrigerator is vented. The refrigerator doesn't care if the hot air comes out the front above the refrigerator here, or if instead, if I cut a slot in the back of this cabinet and let the air go right up the back of the refrigerator and up through the cabinet. And you'll see I've got another hole cut in the top. So this way I can give the refrigerator more than adequate ventilation and not have to mess with the front of my cabinets. So here's what I did. Now you see the stain that I used doesn't match exactly, and it's a little sloppy looking, but this is behind the refrigerator. Nobody will ever see this. And the very back of a tall cabinet, again, nobody will ever see. So I'm not too concerned about that. The manual calls for a 1 inch clearance on our new refrigerator that's coming in above the top of the refrigerator, the full width of the refrigerator. So they're asking for a 1 by 36 inch slot. Well, I went ahead and made a 2.5 inch wide slot, and across the back of this cabinet from here to here is actually 38 inches. So I've got at least 250% of what they require for ventilation. So that should be more than enough. And I made the same hole up top at the top of the cabinet. 2.5 inches wide and the full width of the cabinet. So let me show you what that looks like from the top. Okay, I didn't want anything to fall down behind here and go down into the slot and fall behind the refrigerator. So I put a little piece of wood trim here that also stiffens up this bottom shelf where I cut it away from the back wall, because there were nails coming through the back wall into this shelf to support the back of it. So this gives the shelf some nice support, and it keeps you from seeing that slot when you're up here above the refrigerator, and it keeps things from getting pushed back and falling over that slot or obstructing that slot. I even considered putting some wire mesh over this, but I don't think that's necessary. I think I'm just going to leave it open. So there's the look, looking down towards the refrigerator. And here's what we see looking through the top. I also considered mounting some cleats along the side and along the top and putting a false back in this cabinet. So when you open the cabinet doors, you would see a solid piece of plywood here, and it would be like a chimney coming up the back. And I may still do that, but I don't think it's necessary, and I think that the ventilation may actually be better this way rather than forcing the air that comes up through a channel. Plus, this is a lot easier, so I'm probably about done with this. I may go back and put some sort of deflector over the top slot here. just something so that dust doesn't fall down behind here. May put like a little angled piece of wood and kind of direct the air forward, put like a little lid on it. I haven't made up my mind yet. I'm still kind of thinking about that. But let me walk you through the procedure and show you the tools that were used. Alrighty, to start with, I decided to use a 2.5-inch hole saw to cut my hole at both ends of that slot. And one thing I learned is don't push the hole saw right up against the side of your cabinet, because these teeth will kind of chew it up and you'll end up with some marks on the back and on the side. So after making that mistake on my first hole, I grabbed a little popsicle stick here and some duct tape, and I taped this up in the corner, and then I could put this hole saw bit against this and it chews up my popsicle stick. And after I make my hole, I take that down and my wood looks brand new. I didn't mess up the inside of the cabinet. So there's a free little tip for you there. So make the hole about 3/4 of the way through. Now the bottom of my cabinet was 3/4 inch plywood, so when I could see about that much of the hole saw showing, I would stop my cutting, go to the top. There's already a little pilot hole there. Drop this down in the pilot hole and finish the cut from the top. And so by cutting from the bottom and the top, you end up with smoother edges on both surfaces instead of one side being kind of splintered and broken out where you came all the way through with the hole saw. So go 3/4 of the way through, flip it over, and finish your cut from the top. So now I've got 2 round holes at each end. I need to connect those holes. So I use my little square here. I put this against the back wall and I adjusted this forward and backward until this was right at the edge of my hole. So imagine there's my hole saw, I made a hole. Now I get this adjusted right to the edge of that hole that's in there. Then I just take a pencil and run this down the back of the cabinet and mark a straight line that connects the outside parts of the 2 holes. All right, then I use a jigsaw to cut out that line connecting the 2 holes. Now remember, with a jigsaw, it cuts on the upward stroke. So your wood is going to end up smooth on the side away from the jigsaw, and it's going to be rough on the side towards the jigsaw. So rather than put the jigsaw in the top of the cabinet and cutting across where I have my rough edge inside the cabinet, I cut from underneath in the refrigerator section and cut across so that I end up with nice smooth edge on the inside of the cabinet. I'd rather have the rough edge down inside the refrigerator space. So after cutting that slot out, I've got a piece of wood in the back of the cabinet that has a hole at each end, and where I've cut along here with the jigsaw, but it's still attached to the back of the cabinet. Now in my case, I was lucky, and this piece was not glued to the back of the cabinet. It was only put in with staples. And so all I had to do was put my 2 holes at the end, connect the holes, and then use a hammer and just knock this piece out. And so you can see some of the staples are still in it where they pulled through the thin back of the cabinet. Had this been glued, I might have had to make another cut, but I was able to knock that out pretty easily. So now I've got my slot in the back of the cabinet the way that I want it, sanded it, made it nice and smooth, and I repeat the process in the upper cabinet. Well, now I want to make that little ledge to connect the 2. Like I said, this will strengthen the bottom shelf, keep it from sagging since it's no longer supported at the back, and it'll keep things from being pushed over the opening or falling down inside. And so this is just a piece of 1.5 inch by 3/4 of an inch by 6 foot long that I cut to length. So after cutting it to length and test fitting it, I stained it to be a pretty close match to the cabinets. I happen to have some red oak stain that's a pretty close match, and Really, coating it with polyurethane would be ideal, but it's the inside of the cabinet. The cabinets have a rough finish to the inside anyway, and I didn't want to wait for the polyurethane to dry. So I just used some spray on clear and just sprayed it with one heavy coat, and that makes it smoother and slicker than anything else on the inside of the cabinet, so that's good enough for me. Well, I went inside and positioned this to where there's a little bit of a lip. So I've got my slot over here, and I've got about a 1/2 inch lip, and then this. And I'll explain why I left a lip there instead of having this all the way up against the opening. I'll explain that in a moment. But I, again, used my sliding square, checked my distance from the back wall, did that all the way across, and then reached up through the hole that I'd cut, my little slot, and clamped it into place with several clamps. Well, now that it's not going to go anywhere, I can go underneath and mark the center of this piece. I've got this clamped in place. I adjust my square to where this is touching the back of the cabinet, and this part here is in the center of this piece of wood. I go underneath, I draw a line on the bottom of the shelf, and now I can use my drill and drill bit, and I drilled 5 holes through the bottom of the shelf up into this piece of wood. So I had 5 evenly spaced holes. I then used a 2-inch screw that is going through the bottom of the shelf and up into this piece of wood. So after I drilled my 5 pilot holes, I put 5 screws in. I now have a lip to keep things from falling down into the slot on the back of the shelf, and I've supported the shelf. And so even when you get on the ladder and you look inside, you see this, and you don't see that gap that's at the back of the cabinet. And so it looks much nicer, and it really didn't take that long to do, and all I had to buy was 1 piece of wood. And now I have more than adequate ventilation for the refrigerator, and I don't have to alter my cabinets up front. Now, I told you that where the shelf ends, I set this about a 1/2 inch back. So I've got my slot inside the cabinet, I've got about a 1/2 inch lip, and I've got this piece. The reason I left that, I'm still thinking about it. I haven't made up my mind yet. I bought this 3-foot length of gutter guard, and I'm thinking about trimming it down and filling in so I have this over the slot. Again, a little bit of further protection from anything falling down behind the refrigerator. I haven't made up my mind if I'm going to do this or not, but I've got the little lip there to support it if I decide I want to do it. And it should be pretty easy. I don't plan to attach this permanently, so it'd be easy to take it out of there if you need to take it out to clean it. So I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. I've been able to provide the refrigerator with more than adequate ventilation, and I didn't have to cut up the front of my cabinets here, which was making me pretty nervous. And so now I get to leave this alone. The new refrigerator should fit in here with about 1/8 of an inch of clearance, and will have way more ventilation directly up the back of the refrigerator than 1 inch of ventilation would have given it here. I honestly don't know why they don't do cabinets this way all the time. I have heard of a few people that install a 12-inch depth cabinet here. I decided to go ahead and make a deflector to go above the slot on the cabinet. So the slot on the cabinet will be right here, and this little deflector here will keep dust from falling down into the cabinet and will direct the air up away from the wall. So I'm just going to drop this into place. I shouldn't need any screws or anything like that. It should just sit in place. Okay, you'll see we've got some little string lights here on top of our cabinets, but there's the deflector in place. And so like I say, that'll direct the air up away from the wall. It'll keep dust from falling in there. And from the inside of the cabinet, it'll look a lot nicer. So here's the view from inside the cabinet. And so you see that stained wood instead of seeing the raw edge at the top of the cabinet and then the wall behind.